Hello, it's John Heaton, and today I thought I'd discuss a topic which I don't think I've covered before, and this is how the Beatles and politics interacted, if at all, both with the group and after the split. And I think it's fair to say that the earlier period of the Beatles was mostly kind of love songs and nothing too meaningful. And then by the time they got into Rubber Soul, Revolver, they were writing about their life's experiences. But up until that point, quite reluctant to address the political issues of the day as such, and they preferred to keep their messages subliminal if there were political undertones. I mean, an early example of, I don't know if can be called political, but George Harrison's Taxman is obviously aimed at the taxman taking, at the time in the UK, I think it was 98% of his earnings. But the songs that work best for me over the years by any group are songs which are kept somewhat generic, so it's not aimed at any individuals within the then government. It's just aimed at, it's kind of anti-establishment, if you like, and quite a few Beatles songs have that message. And then by the time you got into psychedelia, you were getting the Golden Summer of Love coming through with some of the songs culminating in All You Need Is Love, of course, which some people thought or think now is a bit simplistic, but it was a very wholesome message. And I remember watching an interview with John Lennon in 1975 in New York with Tom Snyder, and Tom Snyder was saying, rather ignorantly, there are no messages in your songs, John. Whereas, unlike other groups, and John said, which other groups? And he said, well, I'm not sure if it's the Stones. And then John cut him down and said, no, it's not the Stones. What do you mean there are no messages in our songs? There were messages going out, all right. They were just subliminal. And All You Need Is Love, he quoted as an example. And then, of course, Revolution came along in '68, which was probably the closest the Beatles got to addressing political issues of the day. The '68 Paris uprisings and stuff going down in California, Burbank. And at the time, they were criticised as being too soft on the issue, not activist enough for the left-wing movement, compared to, people always like to compare the Beatles and the Stones, but the Stones put out Street Fighting Man, which was more of a call to arms than Revolution was. But you know, John was for the most part of his life a pacifist, and he said, if you talk about destruction, don't you know you can count me out? Now, in the album version, he does say out in because he's not sure, but in most of the interviews of his life, he's choosing the let's do it with flowers as opposed to with guns, because his point is, if you destroy the establishment, then what are you left with? You have to replace it with something. And in Lennon Remembers, he was very scathing about the lack of progress that had been made in the 60s, and said the same bastards are in control, and maybe there's a few more long-haired people walking around London, but basically nothing has changed, and he was quite bitter about that. Going back to the White Album, there's a song called Piggies, which was probably aimed at the establishment again, or politicians, and George is keeping it quite generic and not, he's using wordplay to make it more appealing perhaps to the general public. So half the population didn't realise it was a dig at politicians. It's a little bit of a bitter song, but it's quite interesting. Blackbird, Paul has said in more recent interviews that it was about the civil rights movement, but I'm not sure if he said that at the time. But one of the beauties of that song is it can be taken as just a beautiful song about a bird, a blackbird, or it can be taken as a sympathetic song for civil rights. So that's the beauty of that song. But mostly the Beatles' songs were about love or life's experiences, whether uplifting, such as Here Comes the Sun, being let down by the Maharishi, in John's case, Sexy Sadie, his new love for Yoko, from John, I Want You, Don't Let Me Down, and from Paul, I Will, his new love for Linda. Back in USSR, is that political? I see it more as a parody. I think the words do a job in bringing East and West together, because the Russians must have loved that song, and the Russian fans anyway, if they were allowed to hear it, which they probably weren't, or only illegally. But I don't think it's a particularly anti-American song or particularly pro-Russian. I think it's just a fun lyric, and there's a big Beach Boys parody, of course, in the middle section. So John is probably the first to get very political with his Give Peace a Chance single, which got to number 2 in August of '69, and was actually sitting at the number 2 spot on the day they walked across the zebra crossing for the cover of Abbey Road. And that became a kind of anthem for the anti-Vietnam movement. But then Instant Karma was more about self-improvement, and on John Lennon Plastic Ono Band, he's more examining his own pain and his own childhood and his own disillusionment with fame. And although there are songs such as Working Class Hero, which are anti-establishment, I'm not sure if you can call them political. When they've tortured and scared you for 20 odd years, then they expect you to pick a career when you can't really function. You're so full of fear. But on the whole, this record, Plastic Ono Band, is sort of anti-religion, anti-fame, anti-drugs, and having a go at his parents, or bemoaning the loss of his mother and having a go at his father. Remember is another bitter song which could be construed as political, but the words are kept quite generic, and there's a little joke at the end where remember the 5th of November, which was the failed gunpowder plot, but in this song John puts an explosion in, because in the Lennon Remembers interview he said he thought it was quite apt that they should blow up the Houses of Parliament. So, and then after 1970, John would get more political. He'd go through what we call the political period of his life. Not immediately, but Power to the People was very much a political song, and the front cover shows him dressed up in sort of military garb, really, which is quite interesting. I remember George Martin saying he didn't think much of the song, but I think it's lasted the test of time, I really do. And it's a tremendous sounding track. Maybe the lyrics are not the best, but I think I prefer it to Give Peace a Chance. I listen to it more often. And then we've got the Imagine album, where Paul came up with a strange quote at the time. Unlike Imagine, that's the real John. There was too much political stuff on the other albums. And John reacted, you think Imagine ain't political? It's Plastic Ono Band with chocolate put on it for conservatives like yourself. And although Imagine is not directly aimed at any government or other, it's a humanitarian song, utopia, wishing for a utopian ideal of all humans living together in peace, and in that sense it's quite political. But having said that, kept sufficiently generic to make it appeal to the ages, so that we could be listening to this in not we, but our descendants, listening to this in a couple of 100 years' time and getting the same meaning out of it. Again, Happy Christmas, that Christmas of '71 was another great humanitarian song, and again, which has lasted the test of time. From the Imagine album, the one which sticks out as being political would probably be Give Me Some Truth, which we've recently seen the Beatles working on them, Let It Be sessions. This was very interesting. And there, he's kept the lyrics generic compared to the Sometime in New York City album from the following year, but he's got a sly reference to Nixon in there, Son of Tricky Dicky, which I can only think is aimed at Nixon, and he's very scathing about politicians and hypocritics and a lot of other people in that song, and I think it's tremendous. Then we have the following year, we have Sometime in New York City, which was John's heavily political period, which is just coming up to its 50th anniversary, so look forward to seeing the anniversary version of that. And here we've got very political songs on the subject of Ireland, where the Republic of Ireland was fighting for independence from Great Britain and resorting to quite extreme means to try and achieve their aims. There's a couple of songs about Ireland there, and a particular incident called Sunday Bloody Sunday, so called, which happened in February 72 when 13 protesters got shot down by the British government. And that song provoked John to write a song, and Paul as well to write possibly his most political song of his whole career, Give Ireland Back to the Irish, which was swiftly banned by the radio stations. And even more recently, he wanted to put it on a compilation, and the record company said, please don't put it out, as if it was going to make any difference 20 or 30 years later. But very controversial at the time. Not the best song of all time, but very interesting to see that John and Paul reacting to exactly the same event. So other songs on Sometime New York City, we've got John addressing feminism with Yoko, prison riots in Attica, John Sinclair, who is an unfortunate man who got sentenced to 10 years in prison for having 2 marijuana joints on him, and eventually John got him released by doing a benefit gig for him. But this all this activity led to the Nixon government being paranoid about John and trying to deport him from the US, which continued for the next three or 4 years, and they very nearly succeeded. So John went into his shell a bit after that, and you didn't hear much for him for 18 months from him, until Mind Games came out. And on Mind Games there's a superb song called Bring on the Lucy (Free to People), which is the most political song on the album, in fact the only political song on the album really, I suppose, although Mind Games is subliminal again. We don't care what flag you're waving, we don't even want to play your game. You think you're cool and know what you're doing, 666 is your name. And then the chorus, Free to People. And then Walls and Bridges, not more about his own experience, separated from Yoko and stuff, an aura of misery according to John, but not very political at all. And then the closest to him being political in 1980 with his comeback for me is Nobody Told Me. The Starving Back in China, so finish what you got. It's quite tongue-in-cheek look at the world. So not really political, but just a comment on society and how humans, everybody's talking but no one says a word. Everybody's smoking and no one's getting high. That kind of thing. Sort of double meanings. So that was John. Then Paul, as I say, after the Ireland song, not really many political songs from him until the early 90s, where we had a B-side called Big Boys Bickering. We had a track on Off the Ground called Looking for Changes, which was protesting for animal rights. Not very great songs, either of them, but heartfelt. But I think, in general, Beatles and solo Beatles, their best songs are when they lift the human spirit. And so a song like With a Little Luck, with its sunny optimism, the willow turns his back on inclement weather, and if he can do it, we can do it, just for me and you. It's not a fantastic lyric, and it didn't make its way into the recent McCartney lyrics book for some reason, but I think it's a very uplifting lyric, and just full of, as I say, sunny optimism. And the Tug of War title track, I think, is his biggest triumph in that respect, and I'll come to talk about that in a bit. But on the whole, Paul does themes like Escape, like Bound on the Run, better than he does Politics, or straight love songs, whether it be to Linda or a song about love in general, like Listen to What the Man Said. So that's Paul. George, I'm not saying Paul is not political, he just preferred not to express it in songs. George, for the most part, his songs are spiritual rather than political, although there could be a link between the two, but more about self-improvement, with the notable exception of Bangladesh, which was George's triumph. Organised a concert and got all his buddies to appear, and the single didn't do brilliantly, but the concert was a runaway success, and it's the first of its kind, and we've obviously had many charity concerts since, and that's probably his supreme achievement in terms of making the world aware of a problem down in Bangladesh, where a lot of people were starving And then the other great song from George on the political side was Save the World from his Summer in England album from 1981, which the tune is not one of his best, but the words are very meaningful. The Russians have the biggest share with their long fingers everywhere, and now they've bombs in outer space, laser beams and atomic waste, trying to end up on a happy note, like trying to make concrete float. It's very simple knowing that God in your heart lives. And then another verse, rainforest chopped for paper towels, 1 acre gone in every hour. Our birds and wildlife all destroyed to keep some millionaires employed. I love that lyric. On his posthumous album Brainwashed, there's the title track Brainwashed, which I guess could be construed as political, or I think it's just having a go at approximately 60% of the human race, which is why I don't particularly like it. Slagging off TV and slagging off mobile phones. I mean, he's got a point, but I think he goes a bit over the top on that song for me. Ringo, well, he's not done many. Obviously, these days it's all about peace and love in his songs, but his first single is probably his greatest triumph. It Don't Come Easy, and I'll talk about that in a bit when I summarise. So, I think rather than looking at songs that are directly political, if I had to pick 5 songs, my favourite, which are directly political, more or less directly, Revolution from the Beatles, Give Me Some Truth, Power to the People, Free the People and Save the World from George at the end. But I think any song that tries to lift the human spirit can also be described as political in a sense, because it's trying to make the world a better place. And I can think of one example at least from each of the 3 Beatles during the Beatles period together. All You Need Is Love from John. Nothing that you can know that isn't known, nothing you can see that isn't shown, nowhere you can be that isn't where you're meant to be. It's easy. All you need is love. It couldn't be more simple, the lyric, but very uplifting and one for the ages. Hey Jude from Paul. Similarly, I mean, it's sung allegedly to Julian Lennon, although he changed the name from Jules to Jude. But it could be applied to anyone. John saw it as singing to himself. You have found her, now go and get her, about Yoko. But just the words are just so uplifting, and they're trying to cheer someone up, the recipient of the song up, and whoever you are listening to it, it does the trick. Unless, that is, you're seeing it live for the 15th time, in which case it loses its magic. But if you watch the original performance at Twickenham, the video, and seeing Paul looking at the camera, saying, hey Jude, don't make it bad, take a sad song and make it better. Remember to let her into your heart, then you can start to make it better. It's just absolutely outstanding. And then the one from George I've chosen to illustrate this uplifting spirit is Here Comes the Sun. Little darling, I feel the ice is slowly melting. It seems like years since it's been here. Here comes the sun. And on the other verse, I see the smiles returning to the faces. Seems like years since it's been here. Here comes the sun. And there's no surprise that is the Beatles' most popular track on Spotify. I just love it because it looks on those 3 songs I've mentioned. Look on the bright side of life. They're uplifting. They're feel-good songs. And then from the solo years, I've picked out one from each of the 4 Beatles, and they have at least one magnum opus. Which, whilst not directly political, I'm going to count it as political because it's trying to make the world a better place. I think from John's case, Imagine is the one which strings to mind. Especially the second verse, Imagine there's no countries, isn't hard to do, nothing to kill or die for, no religion too. He's not saying no religion, he's just saying, no, my God is better than your God type of thing. And maybe it'd be better with one religion for the whole of humanity, given that religious conflict has caused such problems over the centuries. That's his point. Mind Games is also very uplifting. Happy Christmas, as I mentioned earlier. And then from George, Isn't It a Pity? Isn't it a shame? How we break each other's hearts and cause each other pain. How we take each other's love without thinking any more. I think that's just a wonderful lyric. And I think George originally wrote this about the Beatles themselves squabbling, but again, it has a universal appeal. And Ringo's first solo single, written by him, maybe with a bit of help from George. It Don't Come Easy is very, very of the same spirit. You know, open up your heart, let's come together. Use a little love, and we can make things turn out better. I just love it, the spirit, and I don't think he's ever bettered that spirit in any song since, Ringo, in terms of the ones he's written himself. And Step Lightly is another good example of self-betterment on his solo album from '73. But for Paul, I've chosen a slightly later song to illustrate his magnum opus, and it's Tug of War, the title track, which has one of his best sets of lyrics ever, and I was glad to see it was featured in the McCartney lyrics book, which I will pick up, by the way. And luckily, when I came back to Hungary, it apparently had been half price in Waterstones, but I missed it by a day or so. Anyway, back to Tug of War. In years to come, we may discover what the air we breathe and the life we lead are all about, and it won't be soon enough, but it won't be soon enough for me. In another world, we may stand on top of the mountain with our flag unfurled. In the time to come, we may be dancing to the beat, playing on a different drum. It's a tug of war, but with one thing and another, it's a tug of war. We expected more, but with one thing and another, we were trying to outdo each other in a tug of war. I just think it's an absolute classic, and George Martin's production just lifts it to another level. It's a bit less optimistic than some of the other ones I quoted, like Here Comes the Sun and All You Need Is Love, but no less classic. So that was my take on the Beatles and politics, and I think if one takes a narrow view of politics, then their paths didn't cross too much. But if one takes the wider view of politics and looks upon it as like a song for humanity, then there are plenty of examples and classic examples of that from all four of them, and both with the group and post-split as well. So that was that. Thanks for watching. See you next time.